What is up, YouTube? In this video, I am going to be discussing my $2,000 test van build that I created in one day so I could test out Vanlife for myself. The purpose of this trip was to get out there and see if this was everything that it's been hyped up to be. And honestly, the experience was amazing. And for myself, I found that this was probably the best way to get out there and test it. And by no means is my build the absolute cheapest that you could get away with, but it did an amazing job, and I'll give you some pointers on how to make an even better test rig. My name's Eric Johnson, and welcome to my channel. In 2021, I bought a Ford Transit cargo van so I could convert it into the off-grid home of my dreams. I'll be documenting and sharing everything about this DIY van conversion. If you'd like to follow along, by all means, hit that subscribe button. So starting off with the kitchen galley, unfortunately I don't have any footage of the actual build, but this is cut entirely out of one piece of plywood with everything except this kind of fascia board. That was just some extra scrap I had left over at the time. But moving on, the next kind of major construction item was the bed frame itself. Technically, I had already built this bed frame about 2 years prior, made out of one sheet of 1/2-inch Baltic birch, 8 2x4s, and a 4x4 post. All I really did was kind of cut everything to length and screw it all together. And in total, it probably took me about 4 hours to make my bed frame. So I suppose if you want to tack that on to the entire project, then you could call this a 2-day build. But technically, I only really spent 1 day making my van build out of materials that I already had on hand. And while we're on the topic of the bed, I'm not including a mattress in my van build budget, and that's just because I already had one. I'm assuming you do too, but in case you're interested, this is a queen. And as for the actual sink and faucet, the faucet itself was a little more extravagant than I probably would have used, but it is the faucet I had planned on buying for my final build, so I went ahead and splurged. Having used it though, I don't think I would actually buy this again, and I might even replace it. As for the sink itself, it measured 15 inches wide, 17 inches long, and 10 inches deep, so it was a fantastic size to fit everything that I needed. And again, was the sink that I had planned on using in my final build, so I went ahead and splurged here as well. Now, technically it is an undermount sink, but I went ahead and just mounted it as a top mount and secured it with just 4 screws in each of the corners as sort of a temporary way to mount it. No adhesives used, real easy to remove it and then save it for later. As far as the entire kind of kitchen galley plumbing, the drain that I purchased, I found this recommendation from Far Out Ride. It's the exact same drain that he used. And the only real kind of hiccup that I ran into was just the height of the P-trap was such that you could have standing water in the sink. And so I had to lower my jug below that kind of water line to actually get the sink to fully drain. Not a huge deal. And then same as Far Out Ride, added a quick disconnect to make emptying the gray tank a lot easier. Everything was controlled by a foot pump, so manual foot pump, no electronics, kept the build cost down, and was super simple. It's just gravity fed into the freshwater tank and then hook that up to the cold water line of the faucet. Now, there are a couple of adapters to go from a barbed 1/2-inch down to a pipe 1/2-inch male, and then from that to a female 1/2-inch to a male, I think it was 3/4 inch or 3/8 inch, I should say. And then that just goes into your standard faucet fitting. Now you do have to cap off the hot water line because we only have one water source, and if you don't cap it, depending on how you have the handle positioned, you can actually spray water down. So make sure to cap that thing off. Now, the last step as it pertained to the kind of plumbing system was just sort of securing the tanks so that they weren't moving around while I was driving, and just in case I needed to slam on the brakes, I didn't want them moving. So kind of the simplest solution I could think of was just getting a couple of scrap plywood boards and then kind of using those to clamp the 2 jugs together, and then coming in with another strap that then secured the entire kind of apparatus to one of the anchor points you can find all throughout the van. Honestly, this system worked great, had no leaks, and I would totally recommend it, though maybe with slightly shorter jugs. Now, the next sort of major system in my rig was the electrical, if you could call this like a house battery. It was the smallest Goal Zero Yeti, the 200X that you could get, but it worked honestly remarkably well as far as charging all of my other components, my batteries, my cameras, my lights. not to mention my fridge. And the Yeti, I had multiple ways of charging. I could either charge it from the solar panels when I was kind of posted up and in good light, or I actually could also charge off of the built-in power inverter that my van had. But honestly, even after my trip, I have found like 1,000 little uses for this portable battery, and it is just super handy. If my budget had allowed, I would have either gone for the larger Yeti or maybe a different brand, but gotten just a larger battery capacity. But that said, this worked fine, even powering my fridge, which is the Dometic 55IM. Now, unfortunately, turning on the ice maker itself uses about 3 times as much power otherwise. So during my trip, that battery was not large enough to power the ice maker option. But if you do decide you want to buy this Dometic, you can get it at REI. And if you buy it when they have the 20% off coupon, you can get it for basically $950. And after the member rebate, it works out to almost $900. So staying on the kind of electronics theme, the next thing up is basically these USB powered lights. I had 2 different lights. This first one was sort of like I guess like a galley light that I found. And it worked perfect for exactly that, just being like a galley light or sort of like a utility kind of work light. And being magnetic, it was able to stick to the ceiling of the van, or it came with a couple of different little I guess adhesive mounted magnetic mounts, which worked perfectly for my purposes. And it just gave you like a extra little focus light for the kind of kitchen prep. And also sometimes when you didn't want to turn on all the lights, if you're just like brushing your teeth, getting ready for bed, you could, just use this one little light. Next were these kind of string lights that I had, or that I had found. They only really covered about half of the van, but honestly, that was enough to provide plenty of light. So all in all, I loved them, and I loved that I could use a variety of different USB battery banks that I already had to power them. Now, these last items aren't really part of the build, but were kind of critical for just sort of keeping organized. So this is just where I kept all my clothes and my camera gear, my drinking water, and of course, the plumbing. All of this, like I said, I built in about a day and a half. This was just like a clothesline that I had added in sort of last minute to kind of give me somewhere to hang up my wool shirts to air out. And underneath the bed, I guess, is like the last little sort of storage area, is where I kept basically like the pantry and these sort of pull-out totes. And this system worked great because of the clearance underneath the bed. There was plenty of storage. But I guess moving on to my sort of meager attempts at temperature control, I didn't really have any custom or appropriately sized window coverings, but I was able to make do with just using my insulated jacket with some magnets. And then the key to it all, though, was adding in a bug screen that allowed me to keep the doors open in the back when it got too hot. This was just a magnetic bug screen that's actually meant for residential sliding doors. I found on Amazon for pretty cheap. It wasn't a perfect fit, but with a little bit of kind of creative positioning, it was a remarkably well enough fit, and it actually did a great job of keeping the bugs out, just like this little bee that tried his hardest to get inside my van for like 20 minutes or something. But thankfully, the bug screen did its job. Now, I didn't have one for the sliding door, and I would so recommend, if you're gonna do this, try and get one for both the back and sliding doors. But worst case scenario, one door is better than none. Now, this entire build cost just over $2,000, kind of depending on what components you include, with my most expensive component, hands down, being the Dometic fridge. You by no means need to get that fridge. The whole point of this is really just to get yourself out there and spend some time in remote places that you wouldn't have traveled to otherwise. And the build just lets you do that in basically a super elevated experience, to where you really are kind of glamping to the max, I guess. It's just so comfortable. You have all of your normal amenities and luxuries, and that does elevate it, but it's not the end all be all. Really, it's making it to the destination, and it's seeing the views. Like, that is the biggest experience. That's the ultimate goal. If you guys are still here and you enjoyed this video, I would so appreciate it if you'd give this video a like, and be sure to check out this video on why I bought the Ford Transit over the Mercedes Sprinter or Ram ProMaster.